Hello there, it's me, Clyde. And before we get too far into things, go ahead and tap that like button and subscribe so you don't forget later. You know how it goes. 1 minute you're awake, and the next you're snoozing into your pillow while a parade marches on without you. And hey, if you feel like supporting this strange little journey through time, you can become a channel member. It helps keep the story lanterns lit, and I'll even make you your very own sleepy story if you'd like. Personalized, just for you. Now then, let's get into it. So I woke up with the sound of drums, faint but growing, and for a moment I thought I'd accidentally wandered into a marching band rehearsal. But then I opened my eyes and realized I was sitting on the edge of a wide cobblestone street under the early sun of Rio de Janeiro, sometime in the 1920s. I know that sounds specific, but you can tell by the hats. Everyone's wearing straw boaters, Panama hats, or those big wide brims with colorful bands. The kind that say, I'm here for the music, but also very concerned about sun exposure. There were palm trees lining the avenue and buildings in the kind of pastel that looks like it's been faded by a century of salty air and samba. Ornate balconies, ironwork railings, very charming and noisy. Not the buildings, I mean. The people. A parade was winding through the street, all shimmer and feathers and trumpet blasts. People leaned out windows, tossing paper confetti, and someone handed me a slice of pineapple on a skewer, like it was the most normal thing to give a man sitting cross-legged on the sidewalk. Which, to be fair, maybe it was. Now, I probably should have gotten up and followed the parade properly, but I'd just woken up. I was still a bit fuzzy, and I wasn't entirely sure where my shoes had gone. I had them earlier. Brown leather, a little dusty from somewhere Ottoman, I think. Anyway, they were gone. So I just sat there and watched as the band marched by, a sea of brass and color, their steps too brisk for my liking. I tried to keep track of them, but my eyes wandered. A woman was selling roasted peanuts from a tiny cart with a blue umbrella. The umbrella had a parrot perched on it. The parrot had a small monocle. I don't think it needed it. I think it just liked the look. I was going to ask the woman about the parrot, but instead I got distracted by a man walking by with a coconut the size of a bowling ball. He had a little wooden mallet and just cracked it open on the edge of the gutter like it was no big deal. Then he sipped from it with a straw that looked like it was made of bamboo. Naturally, I bought one. Mine did not open as easily. I sort of tapped it, then whacked it, then accidentally launched it into the street where it rolled in front of a couple of dancers on stilts. They were very polite about it. Anyway, by the time I got my coconut opened, the parade had turned a corner and was now mostly confetti in the distance. So I sat there, sipping coconut water and wondering if the pocket watch pinned to my cloak was still ticking. It was. Not that it mattered, because in Rio, during Carnival, or whatever day this was, time didn't really seem to work the same way. It felt stretchy, like taffy or warm wax. One of those rubber band balls that gets looser the more you play with it. And with that thought, I leaned back against a warm stone step and let the rhythm of distant drums drift me toward another nap. I think the parade must have circled back around, because just as I was setting my coconut down beside me, trying not to spill the last bit of liquid, which, by the way, tastes vaguely like garden hose water but sweeter, I heard that unmistakable boom of a tuba getting closer again. There are few instruments as confident as a tuba. It doesn't sneak up on you. It announces its presence like a giant hippo in a hammock. And sure enough, here came the tuba player, puffing out his cheeks and marching proudly down the street, several yards ahead of the rest of the band. He was followed, for some reason, by a small white dog with one ear up and one ear flopped over like a soggy pastry. It didn't seem to belong to anyone, just very interested in the tuba. Every time the man puffed out a note, the dog barked once in response. It was like they were having an argument in slow motion. I decided to follow them for a bit. Not because I suddenly wanted to join the parade, but because I was curious how long the dog would keep up the routine. Also, I'd lost track of my coconut, which was rolling gently away down the slight slope of the cobblestones. As I walked, I passed a man selling miniature wooden guitars strung with colorful yarn. He tried to get me to buy one by playing Cielito Lindo on the smallest guitar I'd ever seen. It sounded like someone whispering into a tin can, but I was impressed. So I bought two. One for me and one for, I don't know. The dog, maybe? The tuba and dog kept their rhythm for at least 3 more blocks, until the tuba player turned down an alley that smelled strongly of fried bananas and paint. The dog hesitated, looked at me, then at the tuba, and finally trotted after him. I like to think they're still out there somewhere, arguing happily in brass and barks. Left to my own devices again, I noticed I had wandered into a quieter part of the city. The confetti was thinner here, and the buildings were closer together. Clotheslines stretched between balconies with white sheets flapping like sleepy ghosts. Someone above me was playing a record, scratchy but lively, and I caught the faint scent of lavender mixed with pipe smoke. There was also, for some reason, a rocking chair set up in the middle of the street. No one was sitting in it. Naturally, I sat down, and I stayed there for a while, strumming my tiny guitar with all the musical talent of a distracted possum. I think I played 3 notes total, maybe 4. I never quite figured out if it was tuned, but that was all right. In Rio, in the 1920s, during whatever event I'd stumbled into, time wasn't measured in minutes or hours. It was measured in sunbeams, in the length of a tuba solo, in the echo of a dog's bark bouncing off old stone walls. Eventually, I stood up from the empty rocking chair and wandered farther down the alley until I reached a quiet plaza, tucked away like a secret in the city's patchwork of color and sound. There was a single fountain in the center, its stone edges worn smooth by time and the occasional child climbing up to drop in a coin. I leaned over the edge to see if there were any fish. There weren't. Just a crumpled carnival mask floating face down like it had given up. A breeze ruffled my cloak, and I felt something shift in my pocket. It was one of the tiny wooden guitars. I'd completely forgotten I had 2. I sat on the fountain's edge and pulled the second one out, wondering if I should just leave it there for someone else to find. But just as I was deciding, a man passed by carrying a large tray with dozens of the smallest hats I had ever seen. Teeny tiny hats, top hats, sombreros, even a couple of little straw ones with festive ribbons. Naturally, I asked him who they were for, and he answered, very seriously in Portuguese, that they were hats for lizards. I thought maybe I'd misunderstood, but then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a little green lizard wearing a red beret. I nodded politely and bought 2 hats. One was a miniature bowler, the other had a feather. Now I didn't have a lizard, at least not at that moment, but I did have a tiny guitar, and the mental image of a musically inclined lizard with a feathered cap was too good to pass up. I spent some time rearranging my satchel to make space for the hats. One of them, the bowler, kept tipping over like it was tired, so I gave it a piece of peanut shell for support. Problem solved. Behind me, someone was setting up a chessboard. The pieces were made of what looked like caramel, or maybe polished wood. A small crowd had gathered, mostly older men, all wearing suspenders and chewing thoughtfully on toothpicks. One of them waved me over and pointed to the board. I declined with a smile and gestured at the tiny guitar. He nodded as if to say, "Ah, yes, musician, of course," and I wasn't about to correct him. Just then, a light rain began to fall. Not enough to clear the plaza, just enough to make it sparkle. The fountain rippled, and the lizard hat vendor pulled a translucent sheet over his tray, though not before tipping the beret down over the lizard's eyes like a nap visor. I stayed there for a while, watching the drops fall into puddles and listening to the rain tap against the palm leaves like a drumline trying to be sneaky. Eventually, I stood up and wandered toward the far edge of the square where a man was selling books from a little pushcart. None of them were in English, but one had a picture of a frog on the cover wearing what looked suspiciously like one of the lizard hats I had just bought. So naturally, I took that as a sign. I bought the book, tucked it under my arm, and wandered off again in search of the next quiet moment, the next odd object, the next nap. From the plaza, I wandered through a narrow corridor of alleyways strung with colored flags. The rain had stopped by then, but everything still glistened. Stone, leaves, laundry lines, and the occasional chicken. Yes, there were chickens. 2 of them, in fact, one of whom was wearing what looked suspiciously like a crocheted collar. She seemed proud of it. Eventually, the flags led me into a small square where a gramophone was playing something jazzy and fluttery, the sort of tune that makes your shoulders sway without asking for permission. And there, in the middle of the square, dancing in perfect time, were 3 elderly women in matching floral dresses. They moved slowly, but with flair. One of them twirled a paper parasol, another had maracas. The third wore sunglasses, even though the sky was still clouded over. I stood there watching for a long moment, gently tapping one of the tiny guitars against my knee. There was something hypnotic about it, like they'd been dancing for years and simply paused now and then to sip lemonade or play cards. Their feet shuffled across the damp stone, leaving little prints in the dusting of flower petals scattered everywhere. I sat down on a bench beside a sleeping man and a basket of oranges. The man didn't seem to be selling them. He wasn't guarding them either. He just existed beside them, as if they were old friends and needed no explanation. I reached over and took an orange. The man didn't stir. I peeled it slowly, piece by piece, letting the scent drift into the music like citrus mist. Each segment of orange felt like a tiny sun, and honestly, that made more sense than anything else so far that day. One of the dancing grandmothers noticed me and gave a little wave. I waved back with a hand not sticky from fruit. Then she spun around twice and passed her parasol to the woman with the sunglasses, who promptly opened it and let a bird fly out. I'm not joking. There was a bird in the parasol. It fluttered once, then perched on the fountain edge behind me, as if that was just its Tuesday routine. A boy passed by balancing a stack of tambourines on his head. He wasn't selling them, just walking. Tambourines clinked with every step, like distant bells that weren't in any hurry. I bit into another orange slice and leaned back against the bench, letting my eyes follow the slow turns of the dancers, the drifting petals, and the bird with slightly judgmental eyes. Time, again, didn't move forward here. It tilted sideways and took a nap. As the music faded into the clink of tambourines and the dancers resumed their slow, swaying steps, I wandered past the square and found myself standing in front of a weathered little bookshop with a crooked sign that read Libros e Poesia, books and poetry. Seemed like a fine combination. The front window was foggy, not from moisture, but from sheer time. Glass that had seen decades of hands pressed against it, eyes peeking in, and perhaps the occasional bird collision. I pushed open the wooden door and a tiny brass bell tinkled above my head. Inside, it smelled like old paper and eucalyptus. A cat blinked at me from atop a stack of encyclopedias and then returned to not caring. Behind the counter sat a man with an enormous mustache, typing something on a typewriter so slowly that I could hear every deliberate clack echo off the bookshelves. He didn't look up when he spoke. "You're late," he said. I froze. Was I? "For the sandwich," he clarified, turning finally and pointing to a plate beside the register. "Oh, right, the sandwich." I wasn't entirely sure if I'd agreed to bring him one or if this was a case of mistaken identity, but he looked so hopeful I just nodded and said, "Yes, sorry about that. There was a parade." He smiled. "Of course, there's always a parade." I took a seat in a chair that looked like it might collapse if I leaned back too far and examined the sandwich. It was wrapped in paper and still warm, ham, cheese, and a faint smear of what I think was guava paste. It was divine. I took a bite, and he resumed typing. Every third keystroke, he would pause and sip from a chipped mug with a giraffe on it. The giraffe was wearing glasses. Eventually, I asked his name. "Ottavio," he said. "Clyde," I replied. He nodded like we'd known each other a long time. "What are you writing?" I asked. He considered this carefully, then said, "A list of things I've forgotten." I raised an eyebrow. "So that I don't forget I forgot them," he explained. This made perfect sense in the moment. The cat stretched and knocked over a tower of tiny notebooks. Neither of us reacted. We sat there for a while longer, him typing, me chewing, and the silence between the keystrokes began to feel as familiar as old songs or borrowed coats. Outside, the clouds were starting to clear. Sunlight filtered through the dusty window panes in slices, like cake. The cat yawned. Ottavio sighed. I polished off the sandwich. And for a moment, the world felt completely still. As if the parade had never happened, as if I'd been here all along. I left the bookshop with a warm feeling in my chest and a breadcrumb on my tunic. Ottavio had returned to his typing. Clack, 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 and I had promised to bring him another sandwich if I ever passed this way again. He didn't say goodbye, just waved vaguely in the direction of a dusty atlas, as if to say, "We'll meet again somewhere between the Andes and a grocery store." Outside, the rain had left the streets washed clean and smelling faintly of lemon soap and motor oil. Someone was singing off-key in an upstairs window. A boy with a kite trotted past, the string caught around his wrist like a leash for the sky. And then I saw her, a woman with a bright yellow umbrella painted with scenes of a beach I didn't recognize. Palm trees, boats, and what might have been a pelican wearing sunglasses. She walked with the kind of confidence that only comes from knowing exactly how ridiculous your umbrella is and being proud of it. She paused near a fruit stand, not to buy anything, but to take an hourglass from her bag. She turned it over slowly, deliberately, and set it down on a stool beside the mangoes. Naturally, I asked her what she was timing. She looked at me with the calm patience of someone who routinely answers strange questions from strangers holding tiny guitars. "The time it takes for something beautiful to happen," she said, and then she walked away. I stood there for a moment, just staring at the hourglass. The sand inside was a soft pink, like ground-up seashells. It fell slowly, soundlessly, into the bottom bulb as if reluctant to leave its upper half. Beside me, the fruit vendor shrugged and handed me a lychee. I don't remember paying for it. Maybe I did. Maybe the hourglass paid for it with charm. I ate the lychee, sticky, sweet, slightly floral, and watched the pink sand continue its slow descent. A musician passed by with a violin tucked under his arm, followed by a boy carrying a chair, followed by a goat. Just the one. And for a brief second, I thought I heard the parade again, distant, like a memory echoing in reverse. I sat on the edge of a barrel beside the hourglass and rested my head against the umbrella pole. The painted pelican stared back at me with a knowing look. Something beautiful had in fact just happened, and the sand still hadn't run out. I'm not sure how I ended up on the rooftop. One minute I was watching sand slide through a pink hourglass, and the next I was climbing a spiral staircase behind the fruit vendor's stall that I'm nearly certain wasn't there before. But that's Rio for you. Especially Rio in the 1920s. Especially Rio when your sense of direction is less compass and more, let's just see where this goes. The rooftop was flat and sun-warmed, with terracotta tiles stacked in one corner and a faded deck chair that had definitely seen better decades. From up here, I could see the soft sprawl of the city, domes and towers, patches of green, laundry flapping like flags of forgotten countries. There was a radio on the ledge, crackling slightly, playing a samba so slow and soft it felt like it might drift away at any moment. I sat down, cross-legged, and leaned back against a clay planter filled with something leafy and fragrant. Maybe oregano, or possibly weeds. It smelled nice either way. A cat I hadn't noticed before appeared from behind the chimney, stretched and sat beside me. This one was orange and a bit lopsided, with one ear nicked like he'd been in a brawl with time itself. He gave me a look like, "Don't ruin this with conversation," and then began a very slow nap. So I took out the tiny guitar again and plucked 3 notes, the same 3 as before. I didn't know any others. I don't even think I was trying to play a song. I just liked the way the sound fell into the air and didn't come back. Far below, I could still hear the occasional burst of applause or laughter, a horn, a shout. But it all felt distant now, as if the parade had moved on without me, which it had. Several times, probably. And that was okay. I reached into my pocket and found the little bowler hat from earlier, balanced it on my knee, and imagined the orange cat wearing it. I think he would have hated it. I set it gently on the planter instead. The sun was starting to lower now, casting everything in that slow golden light that makes even laundry lines look romantic. And then, in the very faint distance, I heard it. Drums. The same ones that had woken me up that morning. The same rhythm, only farther away now. Like the memory of a parade rather than the thing itself. I smiled. Because sometimes the best part of a parade is when you stop trying to follow it, and you just sit still, with an orange cat and a tiny guitar, and the feeling that somewhere, something lovely is still marching on. The orange cat was still asleep when I stood up and gave the little guitar one final strum. 3 notes, always the same, but this time they felt like the closing chords of something, even if nothing had truly begun. I stretched, looked around once more at the rooftops of Rio, and quietly made my way back to the spiral staircase. A line of laundry brushed my shoulder on the way down, a sheet, a towel, and something with dancing toucans printed on it. I took that as a good omen. Back on the street, the sunlight had shifted again, warmer now, deeper, like it had been soaking in citrus all day. People moved slower, shadows stretched longer, and the air smelled like caramelizing sugar and salt from the sea. I passed by the spot where I'd seen the lizard hats earlier. The vendor was gone, but the faint impression of his tray still marked the stone. A peanut shell rocked gently in the breeze. A woman nearby was laughing into a telephone mounted on a wall, one of those old public ones with a metal cord and a tiny seat beside it. She caught my eye and waved, as if we'd shared something even though we hadn't. I smiled and tipped an imaginary hat. Then I felt it, a soft warmth in my satchel, a quiet, familiar glow, like the pulse of a memory trying to nudge me awake. I reached inside and wrapped my fingers around the smooth, round stone I always carry, the one that hums gently when it's time. It was glowing, just faintly, not urgent, not loud, just ready. I looked around one last time. The parade was nowhere in sight. Maybe it never really was. Maybe it had been moving inside me all along. Drums in the heart, trumpets in the chest, confetti falling through thought like pink sand in an hourglass. I took a deep breath and stepped into a quiet alley, somewhere between 2 cafes and a stack of clay pots that hadn't been moved since morning. I held the stone in my palm. It pulsed again, and then everything around me began to soften. The breeze stilled, the laughter faded, The city folded gently inward like the last page of a well-loved book. And just like that, I wasn't in Rio anymore. But that's another story. One for another slow day, another gentle nap, another time. Thanks for being here with me. And if you like this story, I hope you'll subscribe, leave a like, and maybe explore the playlist for more of these little sleepy adventures. And if you ever want one made just for you, well, I do that too. Until next time, friend, sleep well.